Ryan Gosling, a Hollywood icon admired by millions, quietly entered a high-end car dealership. To him, it was just another Tuesday, but the events that were about to unfold would be anything but ordinary. The repercussions of this visit, once his true identity was revealed, would be far more than surprising. They would be utterly unforgettable. Before we delve into this narrative, please let us know where you're tuning in from. Your location helps us connect with our global audience. And if you enjoy stories like this one, be sure to subscribe to our channel. We have another compelling story waiting for you tomorrow. It was a typical morning in Malibu, the sun painting the sky with vibrant hues of gold and azure. Ryan Gosling strolled along the streets, blending into the crowd with his casual attire of a denim jacket and simple khakis. His calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the starstruck glances of those few who recognized him. He had always been grounded, never letting fame inflate his ego. A quick wave to a fan here, a polite acknowledgement of a compliment there, and he continued on his way, unhurried and unpretentious. Midway through his walk, he paused at a familiar coffee shop he had frequented for years. "Morning, Leo," he greeted the barista by name as he always did. "How's business?" "Steady as always, Ryan. The usual?" "The usual, please," he confirmed. As he waited for his latte, his thoughts drifted. He had been searching for something specific for several months. It wasn't just a whim, but a genuine desire to combine his passion for automobiles with his commitment to philanthropy. Perhaps a classic car, something he could restore and then donate to a worthy cause, or use as a special tribute. With his latte in hand, he resumed his walk. He had a particular dealership in mind, renowned for its collection of luxurious and exclusive vehicles. It was there that he hoped to find what he sought. Stepping through the glass doors of the dealership, Ryan was met with an atmosphere of opulence. The polished floors gleamed, reflecting the pristine finishes of the cars on display. The hushed ambiance was punctuated only by the soft padding of footsteps on plush carpeting. The air itself carried the distinct aroma of fine leather and expensive polish. Well-dressed sales staff moved through the showroom, attending to clients adorned in designer suits and elegant accessories. Ryan, in his understated attire, went largely unnoticed at first. A few curious glances turned his way, followed by hushed whispers. He paid them no mind, his focus solely on the reason for his visit. His eyes were drawn to a car in the back, a vintage model that seemed to belong to a bygone era. Every detail captivated him. The elegant curves, the flawless paintwork, the air of exclusivity. This was precisely what he had been searching for. With a sense of purpose, Ryan approached a salesman who was engrossed in his phone. "Excuse me," he began, his voice calm and polite. "Could you tell me more about this model?" The salesman glanced up briefly, his interest minimal. "Hold on, I'll get someone," he replied dismissively, before walking away without another word. Ryan watched the man disappear, maintaining his composure. A subtle tightening of his jaw, almost imperceptible, hinted at a flicker of annoyance. Nevertheless, he remained where he was, carefully studying the details of the car that had so captured his attention. Meanwhile, the atmosphere around him seemed to subtly shift, not through overt actions, but through the exchanged glances and hushed comments among the employees. "Does he even know where he is?" one murmured. "Doesn't look like he's buying anything," another replied. Ryan overheard them but chose to ignore their remarks. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully, a subtle gesture that masked his growing discomfort. He preferred not to react, not yet. Standing by the car, he waited for a response. Just then, he noticed someone approaching him. It was the manager, walking with a stiff posture and an appraising look. The tension in the air seemed to thicken, as if each of the manager's steps carried a weight of judgment. The manager finally stopped in front of Ryan. He looked at the car, then at the man admiring it, a faint smile playing on his lips. "This model is exclusive, very rare," the manager stated, his tone sounding more like a challenge than an explanation. "That's exactly what I'm looking for," Ryan replied, his voice firm but still polite. The manager assessed him once more, from head to toe. There was something in his gaze, a mixture of doubt and disdain. "Well, I hope you're ready," he said. "This car isn't for just anyone." Ryan held his gaze, saying nothing. He simply smiled, almost imperceptibly, but his eyes didn't waver. They didn't back down. The manager took a step back, crossing his arms. What no one knew was that Ryan was far more than just anyone. The man standing before them wasn't simply a casual customer, but one of the most admired actors in the world, known not only for his talent, but also for his integrity and humility. When the truth about him came to light, the consequences wouldn't just be surprising, they would be utterly unforgettable. Ryan remained by the rare car, carefully analyzing its details. The texture of the bodywork, the impeccable shine of the paint, and the classic design stirred genuine admiration within him. It was exactly what he was looking for. However, the atmosphere around him seemed at odds with the moment. The stares directed at him and the whispered comments created a growing sense of discomfort. A few minutes later, the manager finally appeared. Richard, a man with a rigid posture and a sharp gaze, walked toward him with firm steps, as though every movement was calculated to assert his status. He stopped a few paces from Ryan, crossing his arms and flashing a smile that felt more like provocation than courtesy. "Interested in this model?" Richard asked, his tone nearly mocking. "Yes, it's an impressive car. I'd like to know more about it," Ryan replied, remaining calm. Richard looked him up and down, lingering on his faded jeans and worn leather jacket. He raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the audacity of this man to walk in looking like that. "Interesting," he murmured, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "This is one of our most exclusive models. Very few people even get to see one of these, let alone own it." Ryan stood firm, but the tension in the air was already palpable. Richard took a small step to the side as if to block Ryan from getting any closer to the car. "And you do realize this car costs more than some homes in Beverly Hills, right?" "It's not something just anyone can take home," Richard continued, his voice sharp. Ryan frowned slightly but kept his tone polite. "I'm aware. That's why I'm here. Interested. Could you tell me more about it?" he insisted, trying to ignore the manager's hostility. Richard let out a dry laugh, a sound carrying more disdain than humor. He crossed his arms again and leaned slightly forward. "Look, I don't know how to put this more simply, but models like this attract a certain kind of clientele. People who understand what they're buying, you know? And with all due respect, you don't exactly seem to fit the profile." Ryan took a deep breath, trying to contain the discomfort that was now beginning to morph into something closer to indignation. He tilted his head slightly, as though trying to confirm he'd heard correctly. "Profile?" he repeated neutrally. "Yes, profile," Richard emphasized. "Our cars aren't just vehicles. They're symbols of status, success, exclusivity. Things that, sorry to say, don't seem to align much with, well, this," he said, gesturing theatrically toward Ryan's clothing. The silence that followed was deafening. Some employees stopped what they were doing to watch the scene, while others pretended they weren't listening. Ryan didn't respond immediately. He stared at Richard for a long moment, as though carefully measuring his words. "Curious how you seem to know so much about people just by what they're wearing. That says more about you than it does about me," Ryan finally said, his voice still calm but laced with firmness. Richard narrowed his eyes, clearly irritated by the response. He stepped closer, invading Ryan's personal space, lowering his voice slightly, though the acidic tone remained. "Listen here, buddy. I see people like you all the time. They come in, look at the cars, dream a little, and then leave without spending a dime. If you're here to play pretend, I'll ask you not to waste any more of my time or my team's time." Ryan didn't move, but his posture now conveyed something different. It was no longer just patience. There was a silent determination in his eyes. "And what if I'm not here to dream?" he asked simply. Richard let out a short laugh and shook his head as though finding the question absurd. "Then I'd say you're in the wrong place. Because this place is for people who can pay, people who have something to prove. And honestly, you don't look like you have either." The air around them seemed to grow heavier, oppressive. Ryan looked at Richard for a few more seconds, his discomfort now transformed into something deeper, almost a restrained indignation. He gave a slight smile, Not one of joy, but of someone who had fully understood the kind of person he was dealing with. Funny, I always thought the real luxury was treating people with respect. Maybe you should think about that, Ryan said, his voice calm but cutting. Ryan stood firm before the manager, Richard, who now radiated anger and contempt with every word. The tension in the room was palpable, and the employees and customers nearby could no longer hide that they were watching the confrontation. Richard's hostile tone grew sharper, as though he needed to win this argument to reaffirm his authority. "People like you only come here to waste everyone's time," Richard said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "This isn't a stroll through the park, and it's definitely not a place for dreamers with worn jackets and empty pockets." Ryan tilted his head slightly, studying the man in front of him with a calm but penetrating gaze. He took a deep breath before replying, carefully choosing his words. "Funny, you talk about wasting time when you're so busy judging others by what they wear instead of who they are. Maybe you should think about what really matters," he said, his voice steady but resolute. Richard narrowed his eyes, his face now flushed with frustration. He stepped forward, invading Ryan's personal space. "Oh, I know exactly what matters," he snapped, his tone laced with venom. "And it's certainly not moral lessons from someone who thinks they have the right to walk in here like they belong. You don't know who you're dealing with." Ryan didn't flinch. He held his ground, his gaze locked with Richard's. This only further fueled the manager's anger. Realizing his words were having no effect, Richard completely lost control. "You don't tell me what to do," Richard shouted, raising his fist in a rash attempt to intimidate Ryan, or perhaps even to strike him. But Ryan reacted swiftly. With the composure of someone accustomed to tense situations, he raised his hand and caught Richard's fist midair. The movement was firm, yet not aggressive, a gesture of restraint, not retaliation. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Richard stood still, stunned that his blow had been so easily intercepted. The entire showroom fell silent, all eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. Ryan looked directly into Richard's eyes, his expression now carrying something deeper. He didn't appear angry, but there was an almost unsettling strength in his voice when he spoke. "The anger you're feeling has nothing to do with me. Maybe it's time to look inward and deal with that before you take it out on others." He released Richard's fist with the same calm demeanor with which he had stopped it. The manager stepped back, clearly shaken, but he tried to mask his insecurity with a rigid posture. Ryan adjusted his jacket, stepped back slightly, and cast one last look at Richard. Respect doesn't cost a thing, but for some people it seems harder to find than any car in this place. Without waiting for a response, Ryan turned and began walking toward the exit. The showroom remained silent, save for the sound of his firm footsteps on the gleaming floor. The employees and customers stood frozen, some still holding their breath, as though unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Then, something caught Ryan's attention. A young man standing in a corner of the dealership was holding up his phone. He had been recording, not just the final interaction, but apparently the entire scene. Ryan paused for a brief moment, locking eyes with the young man who looked nervous but determined. The man gave Ryan a small nod, a gesture of quiet solidarity. Ryan responded with a faint smile, almost imperceptible, before walking out through the glass doors, disappearing into the Los Angeles sunlight. Inside the dealership, Richard struggled to regain his composure, but the silence around him and the accusing stares of the other employees made it clear that something had changed. The video recorded by the young man wouldn't stay hidden for long, and when the world saw what had happened in that showroom, the consequences would be as devastating as they were inevitable. By the next morning, the world already knew the story. The video recorded in the dealership had been posted on social media by the young man who had quietly documented everything. Within hours, the footage went viral, shared by thousands of people outraged by the treatment Ryan Gosling had received. The contrast was striking. A man renowned for his humility being humiliated by someone so arrogant. The video began with Richard ignoring Ryan and making disrespectful remarks, But the turning point was unmistakable. The moment when the manager attempted to assault Ryan, only for him to deflect it with unsettling calm. Ryan's line, "Respect doesn't cost a thing, but it seems rarer than any car here," instantly went viral, appearing on posts, memes, and even in newspaper headlines online. The comments were relentless. "How can anyone treat Ryan Gosling like this? He's literally one of the most humble and kind men in Hollywood. That manager clearly thinks he's superior. What a disgrace to the dealership." Ryan, as always, handling arrogant people with grace. Absolute legend. This should be a lesson. Never underestimate people regardless of how they appear.